Okay, good evening, everybody. Tonight the share is about I spy with my little eye, the sin, the mistake of the spies. Excuse me, Parsha Shelach, Moshe Rabbeinu sends out spies to spy out Eretz Israel, and they come back with a negative report. They failed to trust in Hashem, and they created a very negative impression of Eretz Israel. They spoke Lashon Hara about Eretz Israel, we discussed that. And the Medrash says as follows. Medrash Tanchuma in Parsha Shelach, this week's Parsha. V'amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said to them, Atem bechisem bechir shel chinam. You cried a crying for naught, for no reason. You cried on that night, the night of Tisha B'Av, when the spies came back with their message. A crying for no reason. Ani ekbar lechem, I, says Hashem, I'm going to fix for you, Laila zu, this night, as a bechir l'doros, as a night of crying for all for generations. And it from the says the Medrash goes on, uminoisa shah nigzera al beis hamikdash shetcharev, will be destroyed. The Beis Hamikdash, that was when the Beis Hamikdash, hundreds of years hence, would be destroyed. The night of Tisha B'Av is traditionally a day of disaster. That was the day that the first and second temples were destroyed. That was the day that Beitar was destroyed, where hundreds and thousands of Jews were slaughtered, and it put paid to the hopes of Mashiach coming in that generation. And when we say that there were hopes of Mashiach coming, even Rabbi Akiva in that generation believed that a man called Bar Kochba, Bar Koziva, was the Mashiach. Now, Rabbi Akiva doesn't make a mistake. What it meant was that he could have been, he had the potential to be Mashiach, but the generation was not fit, and therefore he was not able. And the Romans slaughtered, as I said, hundreds and thousands of Jews in Beitar, one of the Gemaras we learn on Gittin. So great was the carnage that they fertilized the fields for 7 years with Jewish blood, and the Romans did not allow the bodies to be buried, and there was a nace whereby the bodies did not decompose, and finally they were brought to Kever Yisrael, to Jewish burial. And Chazal, because of that miracle, inserted into Birkas Hamazon to this day the fourth bracha. The first three brachas is the Dioraisa and Birkas Hamazon, grace after meals, and the fourth bracha is the Rabbanon, and it Hatov Ha'metiv, and it commemorates that miracle. A night of tragedy. That also was the day that Yirmiyah, as Yirmiyah predicted, the Jerusalem would be plowed over like a Tzion Sadeh Techoresh. Zion will be plowed over like a field. All remnants of the Beis Hamikdash was eradicated. But that day, Tisha B'Av goes on through history. It doesn't stop there. On the 9th of Av, 1492, the Jews were expelled from Spain. On the 9th of Av, 1914, the First World War began. It broke out on various days in August. But that was Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av was one of those days. And as we know, the insubstantial peace of the First World War led directly to the Second World War, in which 6 million of our brethren were slaughtered by the Nazi monsters. And on the 9th of Av in 1942, the first transport of deportees left Malkinia on July the 23rd, 1942, Tisha B'Av, in the morning hours. It was loaded with Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto, and the train was made up of 60 closed cars, crowded with people. The car doors were locked from the outside and the air apertures barred with barbed wire. 9th of Av 1942 was the day that the killings, the murders started in Treblinka. And all this comes from what? The sin of the spies. It's difficult to understand why this was such a seminal mistake, why it's something which is carried on throughout history, why it is that we fast the only 25-hour fast that's a rabbinic fast in the whole of the Jewish calendar. And it's compared to the three most serious averas. Lashon Hara is compared to Gilui Arayos, Shfichas Domim, and Avodah Zarah. Sexual immorality, bloodshed, murder, and idol worship. Just find the source here. No, I can't see it now. Okay, we'll find it later. How can we understand that speaking badly about somebody, Lashon Hara, and we're talking about a person, can be compared to those three cardinal sins? And even more, if you look throughout the whole of the book of the Chofetz Chaim, you'll find not one word about Lashon Hara, about sticks and stones, about a country, about a land. How can you speak Lashon Hara about a land? And the third question I want to deal with is that the classic case of Lashon Hara is derived from the case of Miriam, where Miriam spoke negatively about Moshe Rabbeinu. We say it every morning. That's one of the 6 remembrance. Zocher es asher asa Hashem Elokecha leMiriam b'derech b'teitzes Mitzrayim. Remember what Hashem did to Miriam, Hashem your God did to Miriam, on the way of your exodus from Egypt. Now, if Miriam is the classic case of Lashon Hara, and we learn that out from Miriam, how is it that the case of Miriam, there was no malice aforethought? For sure, Miriam did not have any resentment against Moshe Rabbeinu. She merely questioned his marrying Isha Kushis. She merely made a mistake in her understanding of the level of Moshe, her brother. And of course, Moshe was in no way wounded by what she said. In the very next pasuk, he goes on to say that Moshe was the on of Mikol Adam, the humblest of all men. And yet Miriam's Lashon Hara is so severe that we have a mitzvah, as I just read to you, to remember what Hashem did to Miriam. We learn out the Issur of Lashon Hara from Miriam, and yet Miriam's Lashon Hara seems to lack all of the, what we would say, classic mistakes of Lashon Hara, that it's vengeful, it's vindictive, that it damages the person whom it's spoken about. None of those things are true about Miriam and her Lashon Hara. So again, we've got these questions. Why is Lashon Hara so severe? Why is it compared to the 3 cardinal sins of Gilui Arayos, Shfichas Domim, and Avodah Zarah? Number 2, how can you speak Lashon Hara about a land? Isn't it? I mean, the Chofetz Chaim has a whole sefer, Chofetz Chaim. Somebody who wants to save who desires life. Guard your tongue. Guard your tongue. From what? So speaking about people. And not about rivers, not about trees. How can you speak Lashon Hara about a land? And again, as we saw with Miriam, Miriam has none of the so-called negative effects which are usually connected with Lashon Hara. Now the Rambam in Sefer Yad Chazakah, he describes 3 levels of Lashon Hara. Generally, Lashon Hara is a catch-all term, but it really has 3 distinct parts to it. The least severe form of Lashon Hara, but it's still Lashon Hara, is called Rechilut. Why is it called Rechilut? A Rochil is a traveling salesman. A Rochil piles up his wares here, and he takes them and he sells them over there. Says the Rambam, this is in Hilchus Deus Perek Zayin, Halacha Beis. Ezo Rochil, what is a Rochil? A tale-bearer, we would say a gossiper. Zeh Shetoyin Devarim, he who loads up things or words, V'holech Mizeh, and he goes from here, Lezeh, to some other place, V'oimer, and he says over there, oh, Kach Amaploni, that's what so-and-so said. Oh, did you hear what so-and-so said? Kach v'kach shamati al Ploni, this is what I heard about Ploni, I heard such and such about him. Afal pi shehu emes, even though that's true, and he has no, and that's the point here, he has no malice aforethought. Nevertheless, says the Rambam, Zeh machriv hesa olam. This one is destroying the world. Yesh avon gadol mizeh. There's a sin which is greater than this. Ad ma'od, very much so. V'hu b'chlal lav zeh, and it's also included in what we call the general term of Lashon Hara. V'hu Lashon Hara, and that is what's called Lashon Hara. Again, Lashon Hara is the catch-all term, but the second level, the second most severe form of the general category of Lashon Hara is what is actually Lashon Hara, which is Hamasaper b'gnuso chaveiro afal pi she'omer emes. Somebody who talks disparaging about somebody, even though it's true. You often hear people say about Lashon Hara, well, it's true. It doesn't matter that it's true. If it's something which is negative and spoken with a negative intent, that's Lashon Hara. The third, the most severe form of Lashon Hara, Aval ha'omer sheker nikra motzi shem ra al chaveiro. And that is the serious, because that's the most serious level, because it's a lie, it's defamatory, it's intentionally defamatory. So we have these 3 levels. But again, all of these 3 levels have nothing to do, they only have to do, we're talking about human beings, about people. We have to understand what's so damaging about Lashon Hara, and we understand what the purpose of the creation of man was. The Nefesh HaChaim, and I'll read this, says that man was created B'Tselem Elokim. He was created in the image of God. What does that mean? That man has a power to create in a certain way, like God has the ability to create. Now, of course, they're not comparable on the ultimate level. God has the ability to create yesh me'ayin, ex nihilo. Man has the ability to create, says the Nefesh HaChaim, and a large part of the book is based on this. Yesh mi-yesh. Man has the ability to influence to a greater degree, and we're talking about the Jewish people principally, in what happens in this world. Very simply speaking, when a Jew does a mitzvah, the koyach, the power of that mitzvah, ascends to the highest possible world, and it causes an influx, what's called a hashpa'ah, of good to flow down to this world. Meaning that a typhoon that was about to hit the Chinese coast will be diverted, that a serious famine in India will not take place, that people will be rescued from a drowning ship. The koyach, the hashpa'ah of Tov, comes into this world. It goes all the way up from the actions, from the speech and the thoughts, all the way up, and then comes down again as a hashpa'ah of good, or chas v'chalila, if the reverse is true, an aveira, a negative thought, a negative action, a negative word, causes the reverse to come into the world. It's an awesome power. I've always said there's no privilege without responsibility. The Jewish people are the most privileged nation in the world. We've been given Olam Haba. We have a connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We are His people, so to speak. It comes to my mind the story of my father, Rosh Shalom, told me when he was in the furniture business, and when times got tough, he used to have to get in his car and drive down to the southwest of England, to Bristol and places, with his order book and drum up some business. And he said there was always one fellow, a non-Jew, a Christian, that when he would go into his store, he would like usher him in like royalty. Say, "Oh, you are one of His people." So you do find Christians, you do find non-Jews who. I remember another time I was on a plane with my wife. We were flying from Guatemala to, I think it was to Kennedy, and I hadn't realized when we got on the plane. It was a bit of a rush, the whole thing. There was actually an earthquake in Guatemala. That was a whole other story. But we got on the plane, and I realized I was going to have to daven mincha on the plane. So I pushed the button. I said to the stewardess, I said, "Excuse me, but I'm Jewish, and I need to pray the afternoon prayer." So she sort of rushes off, brings back the head stewardess. These three stewardesses sort of usher me to the back of the plane, to the galley, and they sort of, they almost genuflect. They kind of back out and they close the curtain. This guy's keeping the plane in the air. It's like, you do, as much as you'll find the reverse, but you do find non-Jews who, either because of their experiences or their knowledge or their instinct, understand that we have been given a tremendous responsibility, that in a point of fact, they say that the Jews rule the world, that's the non-Jews instinctively understand there's something with the Jews. They just get it wrong. They think that we have this cabal, as they call it. We get together and we decide the fate of the world and the protocols of the elders of Zion and all that kind of nonsense. But in a sense, they are right. The Jewish people do control the world, but we control it by our actions, our thoughts, and our deeds. And we're capable of bringing into this world tremendous blessing, and it's our responsibility to do that. So, man is given this ability to create. And when we say man, of course, principally now, since Har Sinai, that becomes the job of the Jewish people. And again, anybody can convert to becoming Jewish. We're not racist. Anybody can become a Jew. The price of entry is, I think, the only thing in the last 3,500 years which has remained unchanged. There's been no inflation. The price of entry into the Jewish people is exactly what it was 3,500 years ago, which is a Kabbalah's old mitzvahs. You accept the mitzvahs, you go and get a tefillah, you get bris milah if necessary, and that's it. You're a fully paid, card-carrying member of the Jewish people, with all the privileges and all the responsibilities that entails. Nefesh HaChaim says, Ki b'dimyon zeh kaviyachol, because in a certain respect, in a certain way, Barahu Yisbarach es ha'adam, Hashem created man like him with this ability to create. Vehishlitu al Rabbi Ravravon Kochos, and he made man master over a myriad of powers, va'olamois, and worlds, ein mispar, without number. Umasram biyodo, and Hashem has given these worlds, including this world, of course, into the hand of man. Shehehu medaber, he will be the manig, the leader and the guide of them. Al pi kol pirtei hatanuos masav, according to all of the details of his actions, tanuos masav, his actions, b'diburov, and his words, umachshavosov, and his thoughts. For kol sidrei hanhagosov, and all of the order of his actions and the way he behaves, hein latov, or lehefech chas v'chalila, whether for the good or the reverse, God forbid. Man has been given this ability. Now, we know that Hashem created the world. Creation was through speech. Vayadaber Elokim yihi or, that there be light. Vayihi or. The Ramban says at the beginning in Parshas Bereshis that with Hashem basically, first of all, created something out of nothing. And this something out of nothing was pure matter, ungarbed by form. The Ramban says that the Greeks called this hiuli, which is basically pure matter which has yet to form, has yet to evolve from it. After that, says the Ramban, there is no more yesh me'ayin, there is no creation ex nihilo. Everything now becomes yesh mi'yesh, something from something. After that initial, I don't want, that's true, but maybe we could say that initial Big Bang, the initial yesh, which comes out of ayin, something from nothing, that something now, the rest of the creation becomes a gradual progression of yesh mi'yesh. And it is there where the Jewish people, as we've just described, have this ability to create, or chas v'chalila, the reverse. As it says, and again, I'm stressing here that the creation was through words. Vayoma Elokim, Vayoma Elokim, over and over again in the first chapter of Bereshis, and Hashem said, Hashem said, Hashem said. Creation comes through speech. The Pasuk says in Yeshayahu, Vani zos brisi osom oma Hashem, Ruchi asher olecha, my spirit which is upon you, Udevarai asher samti beficho, and my words which I have placed in your mouth, beficho, my words that I've placed in your mouth. Hashem, the Tselem Elokim, the image of God that man was created in, is that just like Hashem speaks and creates, man can speak and also create. Again, he can only create yesh mi'yesh, but it is in a certain way similar to Hashem. As we say in the bracha, Shehakol, talking about Hashem, Shehakol nihiyeh bidvaro. Everything comes into existence through his word. Shehakol nihiyeh bidvaro. Not by coincidence, the word in Hebrew for a word is davar, and the word in Hebrew for a thing is davar. Because things are no more than Hashem, so to speak, speaking them into existence and giving them continued existence through his word. It says in Sefer Bereshis about man, Vayar Elokim es kol asher asa v'hinei tov ma'od. And it was extremely good. And Hashem, God, saw everything that he had made, and it was tov ma'od. Tov ma'od, the word ma'od, mem, aleph, daled, can be arranged into Adam. Tov Adam. Man is charged, man is capable of creating the tov ma'od, of bringing creation to its fulfillment. Tov Adam, tov ma'od. And as we said, all of this is done with the mouth. If Adam does not do this, then in a sense he destroys the world, because he prevents the world from reaching its ultimate purpose. So with this we can understand why Miriam was the classic case of Lashon Hara. Because the whole point about Lashon Hara is not just its negative effects. It's not just that it can negatively affect people's lives, people's shidduchim, people's businesses. It doesn't have to have malice aforethought, and it doesn't have to, and it can even be true. Lashon Hara is so severe because it basically fails to bring the world to its true perfection. It's a failure of man to live up to his responsibility to bring the world from Tov to Tov Ma'od, Tov Odom. And in a sense, anything which does not reach its shleimut, its perfection, is a destruction. And that, in a sense, is why Miriam is the classic case, because it reveals the destructive nature of Lashon Hara without the usual negative connotations, so to speak, of character assassination. Now, there are two Evarim in the body that are described as either being good or bad. They are the ayin and the peh, the eye and the mouth. We talk about ayin tova, we talk about pera. In fact, paro can be read as pera, bad, literally bad mouth. And they are also, these two organs of the body, the ayin, the eye, and the peh, the mouth, are also two letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Peh and ayin. And in point of fact, their sequence is ayin, peh in the alphabet. In the book of Eicha, Lamentations, which chronicles the terrible destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the Yirmiyahu, and we read that Sefer, we read that book on Tisha B'Av. Eicha is written as an acrostic, meaning each one of the stanzas of each of the verses, each chapter starts off with an aleph. The first verse is an aleph, the second verse is a beis, the third is a gimel, etc. And it goes, each one of them goes through the alphabet in order, except something strange happens in the fourth parak. In the fourth chapter of Eicha, there is a reverse when it gets to, it goes samach, peh ayin, instead of samach ayin peh. There is a reversal of the peh and the ayin. Why? What's that? Oh, why is that? So it says in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Daled Amar Beis, Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Bishvil ma hikdim peh la'ayin. Why in Eicha did they reverse the order of peh and they put the peh before the ayin? Bishvil meraglim, because of the meraglim, as Meir just pointed out, Sha'amru befihem ma shaloru be'eineihem, that they said with their mouths what they did not see with their eyes.
Does it say why specifically in the fourth chapter?
I don't know. If we were to understand the sin of the spies, their mistake, it's they allowed themselves, for maybe various different reasons. First of all, they could be that they recognized that their tenure as princes in the desert might be threatened by coming into Eretz Yisrael. Could be on their level, of course, they were the leaders of the Jewish people, but on their level, on that very subtle level, they allowed their own interest to interfere with the impartiality of what they saw. Whatever it was, they did not see, they did not use their eyes first, they did not speak what their eyes saw. Basically, they took their own, if one would borrow a modern analogy, they took their own film script, their peh, and then they filmed it with their eyes. They actually saw what they said. They reversed the reality of creation. The job of man is to faithfully express what it is that exists. And that's why it's interesting that you see only Hashem can be makdim, the peh to the ayin. If you look again in Parshas Bereshis, over and over again, it says, Vayoma Elokim, for example, Vayoma Elokim Yi'or, God said, let there be life. Vaya, and he saw that it was good. All the time. Vayomer vayah. Hashem says and he sees. He says and he sees. God is the only entity who can speak and then see. Man's job is to see and then speak. Hashem brings things into existence with his mouth, Vayomer Elokim, and his eyes, Vayah, gives kiyum, gives continued existence. And that's why we could understand why their sin is properly, because we could have asked another kasha. Why do we say that the sin of the spies is called Lashon Hara? It's really Motzi Shem Ra. They really lied. Remember the difference between Lashon Hara and Motzi Shem Ra is whether it's true or not. Why do we say that the spies, or it does say in one place they spoke Motzi Shem Ra, but it also says they spoke Lashon Hara. Now, one could understand the reason why we could describe what they said as Lashon Hara is because they actually believed what they said. It wasn't, so to speak, that they were deliberately lying. They thought, they took their own script, their own preconceived ideas. They thought this was a land. They wrote this script that Hashem cannot bring us into this land, and then they filmed it. They took this script and they filmed it with their eyes. The eye is, it should be clear by now. There used to be a concept when I was younger that the camera never lies. So nowadays we're living in an era of the deep fake. The camera always lies. The camera always lies, even if there's no, there's no intention. Man's job, and this really applies into many, many ways in life. A person has to understand whatever Hashem writes the script. Vayomer Elokim, Vayah Kitov. Hashem said and he saw. We have to see and say, if Hashem did that, that's good. Kol ma da'asa Rachmana l'tavahu da'asa. Everything that Hashem does is for the good. And even though we don't see it, Hashem decided to give this person, my chavrusa, a better cop, a better head than me. He's brighter than me. He can run faster than me. He's funnier than me. He's taller than me. He's more serious than me. He plays guitar better than me. That's the way it is. That's the way it is. I'm happy for him because why? That's the way Hashem has made the world. If I don't look at life in that way, then I'm magdim per la'ayin. I am the script writer. And if things are not the way I decide they should be, if the world does not follow my script, oy vavoy, that leads a person to jealousy, and it also leads a person to denying Hashem, because things aren't the way that I think they should be. Hey, there should never have been a Holocaust in Europe. How can that be? A Jew has to look at life, look at reality, and says, all I can do is I can see. I have to put my eye in before my peh. I see what Hashem has done, and I bless Hashem for that. I use my peh to express my hakaras hatov, my inability to understand, my desire to understand as much as humanly possible. But first has to become the ayin, the vision of acceptance. We'll just finish with the 2 months of the year in which the spies made their journey in this week's Parsha are the month of Tammuz and Av. Tammuz and Av. The Sefer Yetzirah, which is usually ascribed to Avram Avinu, some say it was written by Adam Rishon, it associates the months of the year to a specific, ability of man, a certain So, for example, Tammuz is the month of and it also associated with the 12 tribes of Israel. Tammuz is the month which is connected with Ruvain. Ruvain quite clearly is to do with the eye, Reuvain, Re'iyah, sight. Reuvain is the human attribute of sight. It's the month of Tammuz. And the next month, the month of Av, is connected to the tribe of Shimon. Shimon comes from Shema Yisrael, to hear. And clearly, there's no hearing if there's nothing to hear. So that's obviously the idea of speech. So the eye, so to speak, in the calendar, and the way the Galim, the tribes traveled through the desert was in that order. That is the correct Seder of the creation. Ayin Peh, Tammuz, Av, Ruvain, Shimon. I think we'll stop here. Let's just maybe chazer over what we tried to learn tonight. We see how serious Lashon Hara is. Chazal compare it to the three fundamental cardinal sins. Difficult to understand why that should be. True, it's not nice to talk about somebody negatively, and it could cause them damage, but speaking about them negatively is the same as killing them. It's like killing somebody or worshipping a Avodah Zarah. Now we can understand how, because the power of speech is essentially the power of creation, that in a sense, negative speech, Lashon Hara, hits at the very building blocks of creation in the same way that those three sins hit at the building blocks of creation. Murder destroys man. Avodah Zarah destroys man's connection with God. And Gilui Arayis destroys a person's relationship with himself. Ostensibly, sexual immorality doesn't do anybody any harm, especially as if it's between what they used to call in England consenting adults in private. So why is that such a cardinal sin? We understand murder, we understand Avodah Zarah. Why is sexual immorality? Because sexual immorality could be that nobody, so to speak, gets hurt by that. And the answer is that sexual immorality is a breakdown in the relationship of man to himself. In his Tzura Sa'adam, he becomes less of a man and more of an animal. Man, as we said, Tov Ma'od, Tov Adam, the ultimate Tov is for man to use his ability of speech to elevate the world. Lashon Hara is therefore parallels the negative influences of those three cardinal sins. Again, that's the same way we answer why you can speak Lashon Hara about a land. It really doesn't matter what you're speaking about. The way we tend to think, generally speaking, about Lashon Hara is the damage that it does to the person who's the subject of the Lashon Hara. Clearly, a land, stones don't get offended or fail to get a job because you spoke badly about a stone or a tree or a river. But again, the same answer. You're destroying the creation. You're preventing the creation from coming to its perfection. And again, this also answers why we derive from Miriam. As we said before, that's the classic case of Lashon Hara. And it's classic because, as we said before, there was nothing negative that resulted from it. There was no malice aforethought, and certainly Moshe Rabbeinu was not in the slightest bit hurt or wounded by what she said. Man, as we said before, is given this awesome responsibility, this awesome privilege to be able to create with his mouth. Hashem should help, especially in these weeks now in the Parsha of Shelach and coming up to Tammuz next month and the month afterwards of Av, that we should be very careful to use our mouths in the way they were given to us to create for davening, to create shefa that comes down into this world by our prayers, by our mitzvahs, by encouraging people. We don't have to go into details how one word can change a person's life. Well-documented cases of people who are on the way to ending their lives. Somebody said a nice word to them and they turned round. Never underestimate the power of a word for the good, or God forbid, for the reverse. To be careful not to hurt people. People are very sensitive. We all know people are very sensitive. Why? Because we're very sensitive. Each one of us is sensitive. And maybe sensitive to things that really logically are not terribly important on the great scheme of things. But words can be very damaging, and words can be very building. So what I'm suggesting is maybe that we should think carefully about how we use our words. The Bali Musa say that a person, back in the day, I don't know if they still have, I think they still do, they have like an electric meter. They have a meter where all the kilowatts are clocking off. Well, a person also has a word meter. A person has been given a meter and he has a certain number of words that he can express, he can say. And when he gets to the end of his nickel or his quarter, he can't put another nickel or quarter. What happens is basically, God forbid, he dies or he has a stroke, he stops speaking. Each one of us has a meter with a certain amount of words. I've heard it said that meter stops when a person is talking Torah or he's using his mouth for a mitzvah. Okay, Hashem should help in these months of where the Jewish people in the Parsha, where the mouth was so destructive that we, the Jewish people in our generation, should try as much as we can to be mataken, to fix the mistakes of our fathers and our forefathers. Thank you.